when they went from Cameron to May, then May to Truss, then Truss May to Johnson. See, even I get confused. Johnson to Truss. If I'm confused, everybody's confused. Then Truss to Sunak. I mean, they turned the governing of them, never mind the number of chancellors we've had that I now can't remember. So they turned the governing of this country in a kind of game of Tory musical chairs. And I think people just say, nah, we've had enough of this.
Only one radio station has Andrew Neil doing a show for the election, and that's Times Radio. Andrew is with us at 1 o'clock today, and we can speak to him now. Morning to you.
Good morning.
What have you made of all these crazy polls today? Peter Kellner was on earlier, and he said that right and left voters seem to be moving around between Reform and Conservative, and between Labour, Lib Dems, and the Greens. Nothing is moving between right and left in this election, which is perhaps not surprising. But is that, I don't know what that is. Is that the legacy of Brexit?
It's partly that. I mean, I think it's the direction of travel. I mean, these polls are quite astounding, but in a way, they're not surprising because Labour started this campaign with a lead of about 20 points and it's still got a lead of about 20 points. I mean, the Labour share of the votes come down a bit, but Tory share of the votes come down a bit too. So it's still 20%. I'm beginning to think that the real dynamic at work here that is motivating how people vote, certainly between Labour and Tory, is that it's not so much Tory policies people are fed up with, though there are plenty of these policies that they are fed up with. I think it's just the Tories they're fed up with. I mean, I think they're now just voting against the Tories. And you saw that with this poll, the mega poll that came out this morning, where sort of well-known Tory names, Grant Shapps, James Cleverly, Penny Mordaunt, I mean, even Rishi Sunak could lose their seats now. Not sure Mr. Sunak will lose his seat, but it would be it could solve a problem for him, because I'm pretty sure if he goes down to the worst defeat ever, he really won't want to hang around in British politics. So if he loses his seat, there's a ready-made exit for him without the embarrassment of having to resign his seat.
Yes.
And I think it's in a curious way, it's a bigger problem when people are voting for personal dislike rather than policy distaste. Because if a party has policies that people don't like, you can change your policies, but you cannot change who you are. And people have made up their minds who the Tories are, and they want them out. They don't just want them out, they want to thump them as they kick them out. And I mean, basically, yesterday's phone-in with the Prime Minister, it was like that scene in Airplane. Remember when the person's sitting on the seat in Airplane and the rest of the passengers follow a line with baseball bats and knives and whatever, and a wrestler come just to thump this person on the seat. It actually was a little unpleasant, I think, and not the British at their best. Wherever you think he is the Prime Minister, whoever our Prime Minister is, deserves some respect.
Well, that's a really interesting point. And I think many people actually hopefully would agree with that. This probably makes what you've just said makes the next question academic then. But this is about communication of a message. But you're saying it's about personality now, not about policy. Jeremy Hunt said he was proud of the Conservative record since 2010. Michael Gove's been on this morning saying he didn't want to boast, but he thinks the party's done well. Is it that the public have stopped listening? Is it that the Conservatives haven't communicated? Actually, hang on a second. We had to do X because of Y. We had to put up taxes because of the pandemic. Or is it just that was too long ago now for people to care?
Well, if they're proud of their record, why are they not fighting on it? Because they're not. And indeed, Rishi Sunak has really tried to fight simply, not even from 2019. He's tried to fight this election simply from the autumn of 2022 until now, the period when he took over from Liz Truss. I mean, I think when you look back, I think two fundamental things have been at work here. One is Brexit, and I've said this before, drained the Conservative Party of energy and in some cases common sense. And then I think secondly, as a governing party, when they went from Cameron to May, then May to Truss, then May to Johnson. See, even I get confused. Johnson to Truss. If I'm confused, everybody's confused. then trust to Sunak. I mean, they turned the governing of never mind the number of chancellors we've had that I now can't remember. So they turned the governing of this country in a kind of game of Tory musical chairs. And I think people just said, nah, we've had enough of this. And I think the fact that it's more just disgust and dislike of the Tories rather than the policies is Labour's manifesto.
The very front page of the Times, the latest YouGov MRP poll leaves the Tories with 108 seats, Labour with the largest majority of any party in 100 years. Keir Starmer would enter Downing Street with, these are just eye-watering numbers, 425 seats. That's a majority of 200. Blair's was 179, so obviously less than that in 1997, and that was seen as historic at the time. There's another poll, Savanta poll, which puts the Tories on 53 seats. 3/4 of the cabinet would lose their seats and the Prime Minister would lose his. That would be a first. Let's speak to Tim Montgomery, who's the founder of Conservative Home. Morning, Tim.
Good morning. You described the polls as interesting. I expect you thought the result against Germany at the weekend was interesting.
Oh,
as well. As
come on now.
I could think of a different adjective to you.
OK, give me some adjectives then, Tim.
Well, look, they're dire. And the only comfort the Tories have, I think, and it's pretty slim comfort, is actually given the poor campaign the Tories have run from the D-Day fiasco to the rain in Downing Street, polls haven't really got any worse, significantly worse, since the beginning of the campaign. And I think
they feel worse to me. Maybe I'm wrong then.
They're a little bit worse, but they're not as they haven't deteriorated as much as you would think perhaps a super gaffe that the D-Day fiasco was amounted to. And I think that's largely because voters have decided after 14 turbulent Conservative years, when we don't need to rehearse all the reasons why people feel disillusioned, but I think it's priced in now. I think voters have decided what they want out of this general election, and I think the tussle really is now between Reform and the two main parties. Can Reform take a few seats away from the two main parties, and can this surge that we're seeing in the Liberal Democrat vote? I think one of the underreported stories of the election, will they get much more than the proportional representation system they normally support would have given them.
But Tim, what about the embarrassment factor? I wonder. What about the effect on the brand, the Conservative brand? Let's say worst case scenario seems to be the Savanta poll, which would give the Tories 53 MPs. 53. Yeah. I bet you never thought. I mean, no one says that's going to happen. 53 for the Savanta poll, the YouGov poll, 108. I bet you never thought you'd see those kind of numbers.
Never would see those things, those sorts of numbers. And, people might call this special pleading, but, I heard William Hague on your leader's newspaper sort of features preview the other day. And I think his point that we should all worry about the opposition only having that number of MPs, because even if you're not a Conservative, we need a strong opposition in this country, an opposition that will ask the difficult questions in Parliament, that will staff the select committees. And he said he found the job of running an opposition difficult when he had about 160 MPs, because there are always a certain number of rogue elements. Some people don't put the hours in, etc., etc. And I think we need a critical number of MPs in opposition to hold any government to account. Otherwise, Keir Starmer will basically be able to do what he wants and put forward legislation that just doesn't stand the test of time.